And we're rolling.
So thank you for allowing us this opportunity to wait. Go. We have to make that other slide.
Oh my gosh.
I took like an hour making this.
I'm glad you put a hat on.
I'm impressed.
Well, I had to. The guy wears a hat.
I know he does. I'm glad you chose to put the hat on.
Yeah. There we go. So we wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the possibility of opting in. Over the past several years, we've had quite high opt-out rates here in Hamilton and across New York State, not just here. Our the next slide. The purpose of what we're doing today really is to inform you about all the aspects of 3A testing and to clarify any questions that you might have. And the outcome that we hope for is that you're able to make a better informed decision. I'm not here to convince you to tell you you need to take the test. I'm here, and Mr. Dowles is here, so that we can share with you what we know about the test. And we use that Mythbusters that came out of my school team meeting, because there are a lot of myths about the tests that are out there. We just want to make sure that if you do choose to opt your child out of the test, that you do so in a very informed way, so that we're not just, the testing's, maybe there's a myth or something you think that's keeping you from having your child take the test. We want to kind of demystify that. And then if at the end of all that, you still decide, you know what, standardized tests aren't for me or whatever reason, that's fine. And just as long as we have, that you're able to make an informed decision about it. So that's our purpose and the outcome and our intent. And at the end, there'll be time for some questions. If anybody has questions, hopefully we'll be able to answer them for you. So
On each of your tables is a really informative resource for you that's put out by NICID. It's frequently asked questions for parents about the testing model and how it's changed. This is based on 2018. They have not put out the new 2019 guidance, but it's very similar. The test structure, the accountability measures are very similar to what they were in 2018. We now add in ESSA, which is for the Every Student Succeeds Act. We have accountability measures as well in there. But this is a really good resource for you to look over. Even though it says 2018, a lot of it applies for 2019. So.
okay. Mr. Dowsland mentioned the ESSA regulations, and that's really why we're talking to you about opting in. ESSA is a federal Every Student Succeeds Act, and it requires that each state gets 95% of their students to take all of the accountability testing that they're offering. So we have to somehow get to 95%. That might be a little lofty, but certainly we can raise that a little bit. In addition, states must factor in the 95% participation rate requirement in the statewide accountability system. So somehow there has to be accountability of the 95% in your how the state measures each school, and I'll share with you on the next slide how that's going to happen. So beginning this year, this is brand new this year, the old way, you were giving, the state would give you something called an AMO for state testing. So it's an annual measurable outcome. So what that means is when you cut all the details away, it's the percentage of twos that you had on the test at your school, the percentage of threes, the percentage of fours, plus the percentage of threes, plus the percentage of fours. You add that up and it comes up with a number. And the state says each school district should get this particular number. They base those numbers off your demographics. And so each year we have a number for our general education population. It's around 130, somewhere in there. And we easily get that number, 130. So the percentage of our kids getting twos, threes, fours, plus fours on the state test. So we do a good job with that. In the last couple of years, not this past year, we did well. We had some trouble with students that were economically disadvantaged, so a smaller subgroup of these kids and these numbers. We weren't meeting our AMO for that subgroup, but we have in the last year, and met it quite well this past year. So that was the old formula. The new formula, and that's called an AYP, that's your annual yearly percentage. So your AYP is how you do on your AYO, or AMO. So the new formula is the same exact thing, but now the state says you must multiply it by your participation rate. So if we go to the next slide, you can see in 2017, now 51% is really 0.51. So you're literally dividing your number in half if only half of your kids take the test. Last year we had our participation rate up a little bit. We're almost 60% last year. So last year they would have multiplied by a 0.59. So, you know, again, we would have lost quite a few points. And we were notified by the state that because with our results last year, using last year's numbers times our participation rate from last year, we would not have made our AYP in the middle school last year. As you know, the middle school has a little bit more of a little higher opt-out rate than the elementary school. A lot of that is because there was a couple of bubble years, 2015, 2016, when both elementary and middle school had like a 50% participation rate, a little less than that actually. Those same students have opted out all the way up through, have not chosen to buy back in. So that bubble is currently in 7th and 8th grade right now. So, and last year was in 6, 7, and 8. That's why you saw last year that they had a 41% participation rate last year. So I expect this number to go up even if we did nothing, because the elementary has had pretty good participation rate the last few years. So what does that mean? It means that if this system was put in place last year, we wouldn't have made our growth. Now, in years past when we didn't make our growth in the economically disadvantaged, we were labeled a focus district. And some of you, that term sounds familiar to you, because our economically disadvantaged students didn't score well. It actually worked out okay. We kind of were given the black eye of having a label on your district for one of your subgroups not meeting. But we got $50,000 each year that we did. We did that for 2 straight years, and the teacher that is here can tell you we were able to do some good things for the school for our economically disadvantaged. We got Orton Gillingham for our kids as a direct result of it. We got a lot of professional development. We got a lot of materials that we're able to. So that was really good. Great. So, however, with this new system, if you're not meeting your goal because of your participation rate, because you multiply it by a 0.69 or whatever, and you don't make it, you're not getting any money. All you're having to do is you have to come up with a plan to get your community to participate in the test the following year. The plan has to be submitted to NYSED, and NYSED has to approve it. And I don't know whether they'll keep funding or not, but there's a whole process that goes through it. If it's multiple years, they come here, they work with you on the participation plan. So it's just a lot of extra work, and I'm not even quite sure how we would go about going into the community and getting people to take the test. So Mr. Dowsland and I thought we just give it the best information we can, and then hopefully you can make an opinion that will.
Well, and if you look at our graduation rates, our success on the Regents exams, our success on AP exams, we are a high-performing school.
Right.
And the methodology based on this formula and then growth measures factored into that, it really mislabels us as an underperforming school, which is an issue because we are not an underperforming school. And it's all based on that participation rate, which is an issue. And I know that the CSOs, Chief School Officers, are in Albany, were in Albany this past weekend in the middle of the week, and they're lobbying the legislators to look at this methodology because it does mislabel high-performing schools. And we don't want to be on those labels because we are not a underperforming school by any means. Next slide.
Next slide, this is the reason why we're here. We're just presenting the information so that you can make an informed decision. Mr. Dowsland, you want to go through something?
So this is year 2 of the new exams. It's a shorter exam. It has 2 parts instead of 3, so the testing is over a 2-day period as opposed to a 3-day period. So the bank of questions is shorter, and they've now untimed the exam. So a student can take all day within our 7:45 to 2:45 time frame. So there's no time constraints now. There was a lot of test anxiety prior to about this being a timed exam in the volume of the test questions. So it created a lot of test anxiety with kids. Students with IEPs can have their modifications, and we are required to provide those accommodations for the state assessments.
In years past, you could only have the test read modification for math. Now you can have the test read for ELA as well too.
Mhm.
And rightfully so, because a lot of the students who have difficulty reading are really high in comprehension and shouldn't be penalized for that. So.
Yeah. Students that score a 1 or 2 are not automatically placed in RTI. ESSA requires that the state assessments are only one measure of student accountability, only one part of growth for providing support services. So that is now out of the formula. The exams are constructed and reviewed by teachers. So the bank of questions, 75% of the questions are now released to our teachers through the NICET portal. So they have access to that. So they can start reviewing the test questions in the bank of the tests. And the big one is that the scores, student scores, are not tied to teacher evaluations.
They used to be.
They used to be,
Okay.
and they are no longer tied to teacher evaluations, which is great. And that was NICET, who is the governing body of the teachers union, really lobbied and basically protested that test scores should not be tied to teacher evaluations. Teacher evaluations are much larger than just one test. So that's a good thing.
A couple of bullets that I would add to that too. The 3A ELA test looks very similar to the 11th grade Regents. The structure of the test, the type of questions, what they're asked the kids to do, to write, to read, are very similar. So the 11th grade Regents is one that students have to pass to graduate. So this gives, doing the 3A testing does give your child a kind of a test run at that. They kind of get an idea of what it looks like and helps them prepare for an 11th grade Regents. I have one other bullet. I was like, oh yeah, there's another reason. Anything you want to add to that, Shadowson? Any time for questions that you might have about testing?
Are the questions more age appropriate than they were in the past?
There's a level of difficulty throughout it. Yeah, there are questions that are very high level of difficulty and questions that are more easier, I guess you would call it. In my personal looking through the test, it hasn't changed much over the last 2, 3, 4 years. So there are going to be difficult questions. And when I say difficult questions, I was thinking on the way in this morning, like a good example. So like in the reading comprehension, there may be 4 correct answers on one multiple choice question, where A, B, C, and D are all correct. It might be an article about a narrative where someone might write about how they started off playing basketball as a kid, but then they found out they really loved tennis, and they go into detail about why tennis is so great and why they like it. It's an individual sport, and you're able to compete against yourself, and so that's what the article is. And then the question at the end would be, or a question would be, what is this article mostly about? One would be that tennis is better, this person likes tennis better than basketball. Okay, that's in the article. Is it true? Yes. Is it what it's mostly about? No. Another answer might be, that it's a real individual thing, or there'll be questions that are varied where one of them is what it's mostly about. So it's a tad subjective at times, and it causes kids to really think deeply about their answers, and comprehension.
So you said that the exams are constructed and reviewed by teachers, the bank of information. At what point in the year, do they see that in the fall, or the month they're planning? Is it a big amount of new work for them? Is it was it in a couple weeks before?
Yeah, so in the elementary school, I'll speak on behalf of that. I do not expect my teachers to do test prep throughout the year where they're getting old test questions. What we do in the elementary school is we do a unit of study, a genre study on test taking, where the kids in grades 3, 4, and 5, and second grade has done this as well too, spend anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks on test taking skills. What does a test look like? What are the types of questions they ask? What types of vocabulary do they use in a test? Evidence building is throughout the year. So we talk to our kids. So one of the big pieces of the state tests and in the regions as well too is to support your opinion and your views with evidence from the text. And so evidence is used throughout the year, not in the context of you have to do it on this test, but in the context of it makes a good argument. That if you have evidence to support what it is you're talking with, that you're using sources to find that evidence, you're able to identify where in the source that it is, and that's a skill that they're going to need all the way through college and life. So yeah, so that part, but we do not get old tests out and beat them over the head with old tests. We don't want that. We really think our instruction that we do here holds water, and the kids will do well on the test, and it's proven that that's true.
Very same for the middle school. The tests have been released, I think, in December, when the bank of questions were released. And I know our teachers review them, pull information that they can then weave into their units of study to help prepare students.
If you engage in New York has the bank of questions, you could actually just Google New York State 3A ELA or math, and you'll get the whole bank is there. You can see what old tests look like, questions, and practice them yourselves. They're tricky. They ask kids to really synthesize information to infer. They're tricky. So
Very difficult tests.
So in saying that, in regards to them being untimed, so where does it come in, especially at those, especially like 3rd, 4th grade, when a teacher sees a kid is really spending a lot of time on it and really starting to get stressed out, and what is the school stance on stepping into that, or how, I mean, do you let the kid just sit there and continue to like struggle through it because it's untimed, or?
I would recommend to my teachers to have them take a break, take a little 5-minute break, just put your pencil down, put your head down. They can use the bathroom during the test, so that's something they can get up and do. Go for a walk to the bathroom and back, get yourself a drink, that sort of thing. There's a point where, an hour and a half into, and it generally takes about an hour for kids to take this test. But when you're getting to like an hour and a half and most of the kids are finished, the teacher will have everyone finish up. There'll be 3, 4, 5 students still working. They can move to a different section of the room or maybe the room next door. We have a sub that comes in to take students who aren't taking the test, who are opting out, into another room. Now the sub can be used for those kids, to supervise those kids while they finish up the test in a different part of the room or next door or somewhere close by.
So my kids definitely would like to join these kids that are opting out.
Yeah.
They're in a room
That-
with a book
yeah.
or whatever they're doing. So
Mhm.
what are the opting out kids doing, and
Yeah.
is it fun, or can it be less fun?
No. No. They have activities in ELA and in math that they should be doing and working on during that time, for sure. Yeah. I think one year someone sent over a practice ELA test with the kids. That was a bit of an issue, so we don't do that. But yeah, they're doing ELA and math during that time.
Beyond measuring which districts are good at getting high participation, what the data being received from these tests, what is it? Is it measuring school district performance? Is it measuring individual student performance?
Good question.
How is it being used?
Right, so you can use it for individual data as one data point, and some teachers do that. But a bigger picture is that it's used for me anyway, and for my building, for looking at programs and practices in our elementary school. And an example that I use is about 3 years ago, we happened to notice that our kids were doing extremely well on the comprehension section of the test, where they're reading and answering the multiple choice questions. We were outperforming the state by a mile, and we were so proud of that. But in the same respect, we looked at our writing, and we were right on the state average for writing. that told us something. So we looked more deeply at our writing and found out, well, we do the units of study in writing from Columbia University. That's our model that we use in elementary school. That's a great, the kids are engaged, it's authentic, they love to write. When writing's over, they're upset. So we really like that program, works well. It doesn't completely correlate to them doing well on the test, unless, which we found out, we put in that unit of study in writing where the kids were able to look at an actual test question and answer that. Because a lot of the writing that they do and reading that they do in the workshop model is choice. And that's why they're so engaged in it, because they're able to have that choice. It's on their level, it's something that interests them. Now you're asking them to do some reading and some writing on something they didn't choose to, and something they may not have any background knowledge on, no experience with. I remember one year there was a whole article and a series of questions on ham radios. And no one knew what that was. Kids were writing that there was a ham in the radio. So we recognized that, and we built that unit of study in on test taking, and then we also started looking really at using the word evidence and making sure that they're restating questions, because these were things that weren't in our units of study. So in a big picture, we were able to take the information from it and see that our kids need to do a little better evidence writing. And really, if you think about it, the writing you do, or the reading that you do in real life, isn't always choice. You know, you have to read insurance policies and data on state testing and whatnot. There's a lot of reading and decision making that you have to do that's in direct result of things that you're not choosing to read. You just have to do it because it's your job or it's part of life. And so kids needed to do that, and we recognize that.
I think, Taylor, too, it's just another piece of data that we can
Right.
compare to our other assessments and then look at holistically to see if there's any gaps. You know, and Kevin talked about there's a writing, they identified some writing gaps that we were able to identify. But I think you have to look at this, you know,
One piece.
it's young learners taking a test, a high stakes test, you know, that could have a bad day. You know, they could have been sick that day, there could have been other environmental factors that maybe they just didn't do well. So I think we have to just look at it as one piece of student growth and look at it holistically.
Yeah, when we first got data back on this, I would, as a teacher then, I dove into the data, and I'm looking at individuals and specific questions and how many kids got this question right and how many didn't that. And I got lost in it for a long time, and in the end I came out of it thinking like, all right, let's think bigger picture here. This is one test. Yeah, we might be able to pull something out of that, but I don't think we need to dive into it for an individual and you know, we need to look at a bigger picture and use this as one piece.
It is a piece that we're measured on.
Yeah.
Has the state given any indication of what will happen if we do not move with AA? What happens with
Right. They haven't given any indication, like financially, what might happen. They've over the years they've said could affect financial aid. They haven't said that with this. They've never done that to a district. In fact, all they've done is help districts that have not met certain goals. They have said that we will be required to come up with a plan that we'll have to develop on how we can improve our participation rate. And if we can't do that ourselves, they'll come here and help do that for us, which we'd rather not.
ASSA is stating that they're clearly not going to withhold federal funding for Title I, which is great. And there are some, if we do find ourselves on a list, there's some measures that we can take to try to get us off of that list.
If we end up on this list, does it affect anything, like where or who like sees us on this list? Does it affect like our seniors as they're applying for colleges? Are we on like, does it affect
No.
anything long-term like
No,
that?
no, it has no bearing on transcripts.
And a lot too, like we're Business Week, Silver Award, or it may affect something like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think
we may not be a niche recipient the following year. I don't know.
Okay.
But
That was a frustration. The first year we were on the focus list, we had 100% graduation rate,
yeah,
but we were in a focus district. It just didn't
correlate.
Right.
correlate. I mean, our kids were going off and doing great things, but yet we're on this focus list. There was no correlation to student success beyond Hamilton.
participation numbers?
No,
But
we,
could have been,
yeah, it could have been.
because we only had
but it
about
was that-
50% of our kids taking it, so.
And that one subgroup did not perform well
Right.
on that test.
Yes, our economically disadvantaged students in ELA.
How long has state testing been done? I come from a very different system of education where testing is everything and part of it, and your achievement is measured from the beginning. So I have mixed views. I don't mind my kids being tested, but I do have a child who struggles. And what is the real value for the child in taking the test? Because it seems like the purpose is, how is the school doing? It seems like from a federal, it's like, well, we're going to wrap you on the knuckles if you don't do what we want you to do.
For a student, I think, and I understand your question. I think one of the advantages would be, what I talked about before, is that they are going to have to pass a Regents in order to graduate, and this gives them practice in doing so. That it's geared to look like the Regents. So, do they need to do that in third grade? That's a parent's choice, I think. But at some point, I think you need to start that. They have what, 8th grade algebra. Like they start. There's
Accelerated.
yeah.
Ninth grade.
There's hurdles that the kids have to do to graduate. They start as early as 8th or 9th grade.
And there is no opt-out of the Regents exams.
And so the Regents is if you pass your Regents, you pass the year.
No, not necessarily. You can pass a class. The Regents is the culminating exam at the end of that course, which allows you to get a Regents diploma for New York State. It's part of the graduation requirements.
Regents sooner. Or, sorry.
Beyond the scope of our-
Mr. Jarko had 2 Regents to get kids ready for, right?
No, just US history.
Just U.S. history,
There's no econ, the other.
global.
Well, I didn't have.
You didn't have global, but social studies had two hurdles to jump
So
over.
if you pass a Regent, or if you pass the class and fail the Regent?
You have to keep retaking.
Yeah, keep
the
taking
Regents.
the
Just keep
Regents.
retaking the
Correct.
Regents.
Yeah. You have your local credit, which you have to have 22 and a half credits to graduate. So that counts as your local credit. But then you have to have 5 Regents exams that you have to pass to graduate.
And so you don't do Regents in all of your subjects.
This is helpful because they not
New York, never had.
Good.
1997 is the other answer to your question. That's when the 3.8, well, it was 4.8 testing at the time started in New York State. I remember it was my first year of teaching. I was a 4th grade teacher, and it's fun.
But there were still standardized tests because I took the Iowa in third
Right,
grade.
that was dependent upon an individual school district. So your school district gave the Iowas, but they didn't report that information to a federal or state agency. It was kept in and used within your district. Right?
I don't know if any of you have an 8th grade student currently, but we were selected by the federal government to administer the NAEP assessments, which is for the national report card this year. So our 8th graders, it was snowed out, it was supposed to be last week, will all be taking the NAEP assessment, which you can opt out of. And we had four families that decided to opt their children out of that. But that'll be a 1-day computer-based test that the 8th graders will take. And that'll be, those results will be reported to the federal government for the national report card. So there's a lot of standardized high stakes testing in education.
How many local schools are in our position of being a focus district, like in Central New York? Do you know or no? Or like, is that public knowledge or?
I know there's one in the Utica area that's similar demographics as us.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
That's
There's a
us.
handful around, but not overwhelming amount. We may be the only one in our BOCES that I'm aware of.
So we have a very high opt-out rate in comparison to local schools around us.
Higher.
Higher.
There's a few schools that are as high as us and a few that are higher.
Okay.
but it's high. It's on the higher end. Yeah.
My daughter has said that in her grade, it seems to be very divided by gender, who takes the test and who doesn't. No, you all have kids in the same grade, have your kids said that?
No.
No? Is that something you find?
I hadn't noticed that. No.
No?
It's possible.
Because of the girls taking
We found, I think someone alluded to it earlier, that kids do influence kids to not take it. Oh, I'm not taking it. Tell your mom to write it. No. And we're trying to discourage that. I mean, that's not a reason to not take an exam.
and I
Some of you
think
chuckling
that-
because you probably have heard this at home.
Yeah.
Why do I have to take the test? You know, so-and-so's not taking it. Yeah.
When brought home your handout, it was like, Mom, this is about opting out of a meeting. Can I have that?
No, it's opting in. The trend for us, we have our opt-in rate has gone up the last 2 years, so we're coming back. So we're not looked at as a district that has high opt-out rates.
So it's really about data. Testing.
A lot of it is about data, yeah.
So that is.
Any other question? Okay, go ahead.
And maybe you can answer this, how, the education community. What's the view of this kind of way of assessing students? Is it positive? This is the way to do it? Is this the best way?
I think it's all over the place. I'd say you've got from this is the best way, this is great, here's why, to, you know, there's better ways to assess kids. You know, I would say as a district, and as a school, as elementary school, I think Bill would, I don't want to speak for you, but I think he'd agree. You know, we do something called conferring in the elementary school. Many of you have probably heard of this. So during the workshop model, reading, writing, math, whatever it is, students do a lot of independent work, and the teacher goes from student to student to student with a notepad, and takes notes, talks to the student. What are you thinking? What's going on? Tell me what you're working on here. And strengths and weaknesses are identified, and the teacher is able to take notes on that, and then, you know, she might say, like, here's something that you might think about trying. Why don't you try this? You know, she models it for them and says, you know, I'm going to come back next week, or I'm going to come back tomorrow and check in on you and see how you're doing with that. You think you could work with that? Okay. And then they come back. And so there's constant assessing going on. That's the best kind of assessing if you're going to ask me as an educator. That's real. It's to the minute. It's differentiated with every kid in the classroom. And so the instruction is being tailored to each individual, and it's on time right there. You know, you don't want an assessment coming back 4 months later or 5 months later saying how you did on something. You'd like some immediate feedback, and that's why we feel that conferring is by far the best form of assessment. That's just my building, in my opinion.
I think there's a lot of conversations about your question. You know, there's a lot of different philosophies. At the secondary level, 4 or 5 years ago, state ed required us to go to SLO, student learning outcomes, where teachers give if you have a state exam, you give a pretest, and then you set targets for each individual student, and then you have a post-test. So it's really about growth, which is really what we want. We want students to grow throughout the year, and you inform instruction based on the results of those pretests. It's individualized for each student. So then you set those targets, so hopefully they reach at the end of the year growth. So you're really measuring what have your students learned throughout the year based on your instruction. And I think that ultimately should be the measure. You know, are students growing? You know, a one-time test, because there's so many different factors that go into that one-time test, I think it's difficult to put a lot of methodology and a lot of notifications on, if you will, that because there's so many different variables that can go into that.
And somewhere along the line too, this is, I'm getting off topic a little bit, going back to the slideshow. somewhere along the line, a 2 was known as you're not passing. You know, not getting a 3 or a 4. No, a 2 is doing very well. In fact, the state has said that a mid-level 2 is where a student should be. So that's another myth buster that I want to put out there too, that, you know, a 2 is actually, it's a hard test. You know, to get a 2, you need like a 75% of the points recovered that are on it. You know, that's, you know, 75 doesn't sound great, but if you saw the test and you read through it, it's difficult. And so, you know, they're saying a mid-level 2 is where a student should be or above.
I think the more you can look holistically at a child's academic progress and growth, the better. You know, and there should be multiple measures. You know, we have to assess. There has to be benchmarks. But you have to look at that holistically because they're young learners and they all grow at different rates and at different levels of ability, and that's okay. But as long as we're measuring that overall holistic growth, I think then we're servicing kids.
In terms of the actual number, that doesn't, I'm trying to remember, usually we just get a number in the mail and that's it. It's never discussed in class or is it?
So the parents do have a fact sheet. It's a 2-pager that comes back on each test, both math and ELA, and there's some pretty detailed information on it, more detailed than it has been in the past. Let's say relatively amount of detailed information, and it does let you know about your child's writing and comprehension skills, where they are. They do, I don't know how much I agree with it, but it says whether your student is, I'm trying to think how it's worded, expected to do on Regents tests in relation to what they did here. So if they got this score, you can expect this score later on. It's a little nerve-wracking to hear when you get your 3rd graders' tests back and it says that they're not going to pass the 11th grade Regents. So.
But in terms of like if a kid had anxiety, they would
Yeah.
never know that unless
No, they
you
would
chose
not, no.
to say to them, you get master reading.
Yeah. We don't take the information back to the individual child and show them, oh, this is how you did. And I don't know how much value they're giving there. Well, thank you for letting us speak and sharing this. Looking forward to Mr. Ponzo says strive for 95. That's our logo. So,
Thank you
okay.
very
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Just a quick update.